I am guilty of this. When it can be done via text, I think we should just text. You don't need to do the whole, hi, how you doing? The weather's so great. So I'm a little bit a part of this. But I don't think I have crippling anxiety and have telephobia like some Gen Zers.
Yeah.
I'm not a Gen Zer. So is this a problem? I mean, can kids make phone calls? Can they network? Can they negotiate? Let's ask David C. Olcott, CEO of Samurai Success. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
So, first of all, Gen Z is people born between 1997 and 2012. Is that accurate?
That's what we understand. It changes a little bit throughout the years, but that's pretty close.
Different years depending on the article you read. But so do kids just not want to be on the phone? Do they not want to talk to people directly?
It's interesting. We've done a lot of studies around this, and actually watching my son raise up around this issue and the way they do this. But there's an old adage that really speaks to this. It says, practice makes perfect. What if I said to you, practice makes permanent? And when you practice something, it strengthens it. Your confidence gets stronger. When you don't practice something, it weakens it. And that's when the fear rushes in to fill that gap. So that's what these kids are experiencing, is they just do not practice using the phone as we did.
David, with more instant messaging platforms available, are we seeing a loss of essential communication skills? That's what it seems like to me, especially in terms of handling like a professional or personal call. I mean, this can impact a young person's career down the road.
It absolutely can. As a matter of fact, coming into our workplace where we communicate, verbally so much, it's so important. Yet I got to tell you, the kids that are growing up today are actually dealing with other kids who don't want to do that face-to-face communication. So, that's the kind of real challenge that we're dealing with, where a workplace really isn't able to sustain the talents and skill sets of the labor force coming into it. So it's going to be a big challenge for us.
So how do we separate between what may be a true phobia, a true problem, versus just a strong preference that they would prefer not to have a phone call and would prefer?
Mine
like
is a
Jamie.
Strong preference.
Yeah, Jamie sounds like that's a pretty strong preference on her part, and I'm making a note of it
Don't
right now.
you dare call me ever.
Yeah. And if you do, don't leave a voicemail. But so how do we separate between what could be a real issue and it's just their generation being different from ours?
Yeah, I think you were going to have to go with the latter one on this one, because I don't want to be in trouble with Jamie for this one as well. Because it's really about understanding that they just haven't practiced. They don't feel comfortable with this stuff. So if you're really going to relate to them, you're going to have to speak their language. And, one of us is going to have to do that.
Why is it my job to change?
No, I love it. Because that's the only person you can change, sir.
Well, okay, I have a question. Why do we care if they can't make a phone call?
Great question. So if you have a sales company, that becomes a real issue, because most of the sales we do are in the internet, but we eventually get to some kind of contact over the phone. So that becomes a real issue for that. So that's the other part. But also in their communication with each other, that phone skill is just absolutely essential to be able to develop strong long-term relationships.
Studies also show that many Gen Z individuals fear spam and scam callers. About 50% wanting to know who's calling first before answering. Shoot, I want to know too. I'm with them about that. Do you think the fear of the scammers and the spam calls has led to this overall distrust in phone communication?
Yeah, I mean, if you're already skeptical about picking up the phone and for whatever reason, and then you just have another, example or rationale to be able to not pick up the phone, like scammers, you're just going to be less and less tempted to be able to practice that skill set. So absolutely, it's having its impact.
Is this really a new thing, or is it just more prevalent with Gen Zers because of the way telecommunications are now?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've actually seen a trend in this strategy from multiple generations, but really heavily concentrated in Gen Z.
Okay.
This idea that they don't know who's on the other end of the line. I mean, via text, you know who's texting you. The number used to come up in the old days, so you kind of know who was calling. So is this fear of just not knowing?
Sure. I mean, that is fear in its own essence, right? If you don't know something, you're going to be afraid of it. It's how do you deal with that fear? And, in our generation, we were focused on, hey, if you are afraid of something, you got to face it. Because what you face dissipates and what you resist persists. So this idea of, if you're really going to jump into this field of really communicating either over the phone or in person, you got to start doing some role playing with somebody you trust.
Okay. So is that how we do it, by role playing? And does that start by initiating a phone call?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, let's take some of the pressure off of this, and let's just say we just sit in a room with somebody that you really trust with a phone in your hand, and you just go through a scenario where you just talk to each other, because that breaks down the fears. You're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to feel a little more comfortable with this. And it's a little tedious, but it's worth the investment in your people.
Dave, how much does the pandemic play in all of this? Because there was no really in-person interaction. It declined so much during that time.
Yeah, it really did, man. It affected us in so many different ways, and including psychologically, that we kind of went really isolationist, in ourselves and in our houses. And then, we came out and we realized we're going to have to deal with people again. So that actually had the impact, and it's time to get back to that place where, hey, we're all communicating again. We don't have our masks on, and it's really need to start getting back to that authenticity with really connecting with people through verbal cues.
I have a really scary story for those Gen Zers out there. There used to be just a couple phones in our house, and it would just ring, and we'd go down and say, hello, not knowing who was on the other line.
And before caller ID and stuff, right?
And you can ask who it is, by the way.
Right.
Right? And remove the mystery.
And boys would have to call my parents' house and ask for me. That's
absolutely
probably was scary too.
I got to ask you, if there's a fear of the phone call, are they just as fearful or less fearful of a Zoom call or a Zoom meeting?
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if I'm in my pajamas, I'm deathly afraid, of course, when that happens, because what I can do over the phone, I can't do in a video. We've learned multiple lessons, I think, over the last couple of years in the pandemic, that people were just not thinking they were on video and had some interesting mistakes that happened for sure.
Yeah, Jeffrey Toobin is the poster boy for that.
I bet not as much, because there's visual cues. They could see the other person.
Right.
Yeah.
You see the face. It's a happy face. There's nonverbal cues there. Yeah.
Well, David C. Olcott, communication styles are just moving a little too fast for some of us in this room. We appreciate this discussion. It's certainly a thinker, CEO of Samurai Success. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.